for people to join. And while we wait, I'm gonna ask you to use something in the Q&A or in the chat box. Stop the chat. I don't know what you're asking about. We're gonna start the session in about 2 minutes. But for everyone who's here, welcome. And just again, a reminder to put your name and where you're from in the chat box or in the Q&A. And I'm also mentioning that we're having a live transcript. So if you want to see subtitles for this session, you can click on the live transcript bottom. It has a CC. And well, we're going to be in another minute and we're going to start launching the session. You can put in chat box or you can put in the Q&A where you're from so we can take a look at where you are. That would be great. Awesome. So we're gonna start the session now. Mary, if you could help me out with pause. Thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. This is our second day of the Code for All Summit, and we are really happy to have you here. As I put in the chat, my name is Sophia from Code for All, and I want to say welcome to Code for All's 2021 Summit. The session you've joined today is called Right to Know, Right to Code, and it's all about open data and freedom of information projects for public procurement accountability. So this is a panel discussion where each speaker will present, panelists will have group discussion, and then the room will be open for Q&A at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A instead of the chat box. We're going to be taking care of it. We're going to be reading the questions and sharing them out loud. And this session is going to be broadcasted live. So you can also take a look at it afterwards, or if you want to check on the recording afterwards, that would be amazing. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Ana Cliverda so she can introduce the speakers and let us know who they are.
Thank you, Sophia. I am here as a sign of collaboration between Code for All and the Summit and Moje Panstwo Foundation that is organizing Personal Democracy Forum Central and Eastern Europe talks, which normally would be a one time in the year event, face-to-face, but as we know, it's not so easy, but we're very grateful that we could make this collaboration on a special day for Moje Panstwo and for all the freedom of information watchdogs and open data people, because Right to Know Day is today. It's a yearly celebration, 28th of September, and we are going to talk about what happened throughout 10 or maybe 13 years in regards to being able to follow the money in a more digital way. We have amazing lineup in regards to using technology for trying to fight for better democracy and anti-corruption. And our leader moderator will be Monika Kayalidis, who is COO and a member of the board of Moje Panstwo Foundation. So I'm giving her the floor to lead us through a very complicated and I really hope so some optimistic stories.
Hi, thank you, Anna, for your kind introduction. It is my pleasure to moderate this discussion because it's not going to be speech by speech, but we're hoping for a very meaningful and lively discussion. So let me introduce to you the three experts we contacted to join us for this discussion. And the reason for us inviting them and not other people was that they are great practitioners of data and public procurement and data in practice in general. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you Adriana Homolova, who is a freelance data journalist and who speaks of herself as a nerd in newsroom. She's a data trainer and public spending research enthusiast. And for that particular reason, we are very, very happy to have her with us, because we're hoping for a number of great case studies and the great stories. I'm sure she has a whole bunch of them. And also we have Veronika Borysenko, who is a development manager at Transparency International Ukraine. And she's also a member of the Zorro team. And she's also a great practitioner because she's, among others, she's responsible for projects related to experience exchange. So she knows a lot of ideas, she knows people, so I'm sure she can share a number of stories as well. And last but not least, we have Karolis Graniskas with us, who represents Open Contracting Partnership. And he leads OCP's programs not only in Europe, but also in Balkans. And he's a great practitioner of access to information, of the quality of data, and of the use of the data. And he's also promoting the culture of access to information in Europe. So advocating for that, we are happy to have. So you see yourself that this conversation cannot be any dull. So let's move it on. I just wanted to add one more thing. I promised Adriana that I will take my drink with me, because we want this meeting to be very, very light. Although we will discuss very serious things, but I asked my experts to, bring their drinks. And I was supposed to have my wine with me, but unfortunately I have really sore throat. So I only have a mug of warm tea. So hopefully you will take over the speaking, because I really can't speak that much, which is great for a moderator. So just to start off, I would like to ask you, what does the Right to Know Day mean to you? Why we're even celebrating this day year after year? And so simply, why is this day so important for us as civil society, for us as citizens, for us as not us, but for institutions representing the countries and the citizens? Why we're celebrating the day? Maybe Adriana, would you like to share your first thoughts? I think I can't hear you. Okay, can we hear Adriana? No, okay. Karolis, maybe you can jump in.
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Monica. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together. Why this day is important? Well, we are having this panel, for example. Probably without this day, we would not have this panel, because this is the time to stop, I think, for a second and reflect, not only psychologically as a movement in the last years. We need to kind of celebrate the progress and remind ourselves that probably in terms of the access to information, we live in the best times ever. At the same time, we being professionals in the field, we know what could be possible, right? And we know what could be expected. So we're always unhappy with the levels of information out there, always unhappy with the quality of data and everything. But hey, stop. Sometimes we have to stop and celebrate and say that, well, guys, as a community, we actually did a good job in the last, well, I've been in the community for more than 10 years now, and we've been struggling so much, you know? So today for me is really about stopping, first of all, celebrating with a very positive emotion, but also reflecting about, like critically asking ourselves, have we been doing a good job? You know, are we in a good space right now? Could have done anything better or worse, you know, things like that. So for me, this day is really about these critical, tough questions to ask, but also about celebration as such.
It's very interesting you're mentioning our appetite for more and more and more, because I think we will be talking about maybe imaginary, but maybe very realistic, we'll decide, perfect world in a few years. So we will be talking about our ambitions and this huge appetite for more. But maybe, Adriana, we can hear you back. No, I don't think so.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sometimes Zoom kind of mutes my microphone for some reason.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry for that. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and hello everybody. Yeah, I unfortunately didn't hear what Karolis said because I was rejoining the Zoom, but so with the risk of repeating what Karolis said, I think
You were
right
just strengthened them, so don't worry.
I think, yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist, and I do view journalism and the institutions, the open, the government as parts of like a system that should check one another. So I think it's very, very important for us to know what the government does and how does it do it in order to so they have a different pair of eyes to kind of check whether what they're doing is whether we agree with what they're doing, right? So in this sense, right to know is very, very, very important for me as a journalist and for everybody that works in journalism, because otherwise we can't do our jobs.
Exactly. Okay, Veronica, do you have anything to add?
Yes,
Are you celebrating?
Yes, of course. Well, actually, I totally agree with Karolis that it's a very good occasion with this day to recall what actually the access to data means. For example, also like in Ukrainian case, and if we speak about public procurement, like before 2016, before our ProZorro system was implemented, there was little data. Well, there were practically no data that was publicly available, and it was very difficult. There were a lot of corruption cases, and it was very difficult like to monitor, to reveal this corruption. And after our ProZorro system was implemented, we received this data, this public data that we are now actively analyzing, detecting corruption, revealing like corruption cases, etc. So I think that's a very good we should definitely celebrate this data because it gave us so much.
Yeah, this is actually very good point that you started, Veronica, because I wanted to explore more on the changes that have been happening throughout the last, let's say, 10, 15 years. And what has really changed in all of your opinions? So when you think of the legislation, when you think of the cooperation with public bodies, when we speak of the reuse of the data and the technology, what are your first thoughts when you think of our possibilities and of the change that we've been experiencing over the years?
if I may start.
Sure.
Yeah, I will just speak about what access to information means in Ukraine, because like we have to understand that three main things. First of all, that the data on public procurement in Ukraine, it became since August 2016. It is open to everyone, and it can be also accessed through Open API. The second thing is that the public procurement data is available. It is published based on the Open Contracting Data Standard, which basically means that we can analyze this data at various stages of public procurement. So from the beginning, from announcement of the tender to the very process of procurement, and also we can track the further situation with concluded agreements. Also, very important thing is that since last year, actually, procuring entities in Ukraine are required to publish in our Prozora system, our public procurement system, all information about all their standards, starting from 1 kopika. So it's basically, yeah, 1 cent, 1 kopika. And literally, we now can see everything. And this gave civil society a lot of possibilities to develop also analytical and monitoring tools. Now we have more than 30 different analytical tools that allow us in Ukraine to monitor data, to analyze data in order to improve in order to improve public procurement, in order to monitor it better. Only we at TI Ukraine, we have developed a public BI module, professional BI modules that help to analyze public procurement from different perspectives. So this is basically an engine which has more than 900 different indicators that allow you to analyze public procurement. We have developed like maps of school procurement, COVID-19 procurement tool, different applications that also help the state authorities, regulatory authorities to do their work better. So this opening up of public procurement data made a lot of for Ukraine. And it also allowed like civil society activists, journalists to monitor public procurement, to identify corruption cases, to file appeals to procuring bodies, to controlling authorities, to law enforcement bodies, and try to fix this violations.
Wow, nice. Can I ask one more question to you, Veronica?
Yeah, sure.
Because it was super interesting for me to learn there are about or over 30 tools analyzing the data. Are they like super going super deep into the data, or they like superficial, statistical, or how they match with the source?
Well, it depends. For example, if we speak about public BI module, professional BI modules, they are very like complex tools, and they allow very deep analysis of the public procurement sphere. There are also like smaller applications, for example, that help procuring entities, or that are allowing to analyze cases or decisions of the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, or the State Audit Service, which are controlling bodies in Ukraine. Also, there are tools that allow to find connections, for example, between different suppliers in order like to reveal possible corruption or something like that. And also to understand what is happening, for example, like in our environment. For example, we as TI have developed recently a map on school procurement, which allows to analyze what basically a school or a university like in your surroundings is buying. The same is also for road construction. You can analyze what is procured. And well, there are a lot of different tools.
Wow, good for you. So it seems like this is something new, and I think this marks this shift, this change in your region, in Ukraine. So this is 2015 or 2016. You said 16, that the data is open, and then the civil society knows how to use it, and then the journalists know how to make stories out of it and expose things that are like if some irregularities, or just to monitor the risk of corruption. But you also mentioned the OCDS standard, which is something that we cannot just ignore in our discussion, because this is something that actually starts our discussion about the quality of data and the quality of publishing of the data, and what is necessary for us to enable civil society actually monitor the public procurement over, from country to country, not only regionally, but in general. So I think, Karolis, the floor is yours, because you're an expert in OCDS. What is that in just 5 words?
Yes, thank you, Monica. So OCDS, Open Contracting Data Standard, just to keep it very, very simple and not to go to technical waters where I find myself very uncomfortable, because I do policy and strategy work. But just to keep it on a very, very simple level, it's a way to collect and publish data about procurement in a standardized way. So it's kind of an agreement of how are we calling certain data in procurement, how are we collecting and publishing. And well, technically speaking, it's a package of things, including things like technical specifications, which is a description of a data standard, a schema, a governance model, and a suite of tools surrounding it, right? So if you're interested, just go to opencontracting.org, check it out. But it's basically an easy solution to collect and publish data in a standardized, high quality, structured way, which is very well documented, recognized globally, and all that. So maybe I'll stop there.
Why is that important to actually to really have that standardized versions in different countries?
Let's talk examples. I would like to bring in probably Adriana here. So I'm aware last year that she did, a research on COVID procurements across the EU countries, right? And you can imagine, if you want to understand how countries buy across 27, 28 countries, right? You have to dig into that type of data. So I'm curious to hear from Adriana, like practically speaking, how would a standardized data help for that exercise?
It was a nightmare. Thank you, Karolis. It was pretty horrible. So I first want to say that what you guys have in Ukraine, I am so jealous. It's I would like to see not only governments in other places to adapt the same willingness to publish this data, but also to do it, but also in the first time the first part, the willingness is just not there. So if their willingness is not there, everybody's just kind of doing whatever the F they want. And so then what you find is that, for example, when it came to COVID procurements, and as you all remember, COVID was kind of a surprise to everybody. And this really showed how the mechanisms of transparency that were there were working, where they were implemented well, and the transparency was absolutely collapsing in places where these standards are not there. So what I tried to do in this project was to collect all the COVID-related procurements since half a year for all the countries, and you found everything from Lithuania, where the publications office tried their best to publish a concise overview of what was bought, to Denmark or the Netherlands, who published absolutely nothing, and they still didn't publish absolutely anything about those procurements, which is on itself a story, I find. And however, even the places where there were data, Portugal, Spain, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, they all came in different formats. They all have different columns. They all measure something else. There's so much of my work went into kind of making one standard table and kind of try to fit in all these pieces into the tables where I could. You have procurement happening on low levels, regional procurement, you have national procurement, you have European procurement. All of these procurements, they look differently, they have different features. It's horrible. That's why I think, yeah, having a data standard is very, very much needed for this data.
Yeah, especially when you want to have a cross-examination across the Europe or region, right?
For sure.
So this is crucial.
And when this is not possible now, right? I mean, I can't really effectively compare how Germany procures paper clips.
Mm-hmm.
To say something very, very simple,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, they're only procuring paper clips, but how Germany does their procurement, to how Netherlands does their procurement, to how Slovakia does their procurement. Some of the great stories of corruption in public spending in Slovakia came from actually being able to say that this particular medical machine costs like 50% more when procured in Slovakia than in Czech Republic, right? Because they could make the cross-country comparison because the data was available. But in so many countries, we don't really have anything. Like, I was at the panel discussion with the Dutch government, among others, about half a year ago, and Dutch government kind of wants to open up some of their procurement, but the political willingness is just not there. So and I was saying, like, you look at Ukraine, right? They have this amazing data. They can do so much with it. And the head of procurement told me, like, yeah, but Ukraine, I mean, we don't have such problems as they do. We don't really need this. And
Of course. Wow.
I'm like, are you seriously saying this? I was baffled. I mean, but this is where it starts. If the willingness is not there, you can't move on.
Yeah. Karolis?
Yes, Karolis.
Yeah, there was, I remember just an example here. So last year, there was a huge scandal of this huge company, construction company in the United Kingdom, Carillion, it was called. And basically, there was a job of a prosecutor, somebody leading an investigation to find out all the contracts that company, including subsidiaries, had with a public sector. And that exercise for them took like months and months of work, like going through each and every department, understanding who is a subsidiary, what contracts they have, pulling it all together in different formats and everything. A nightmare exercise. And together with our colleague Victor Nastulia, I remember I was walking in Yanukovych villa, in Kiev. I said, how about we do this exercise here in Ukraine? Let's find out all the contracts that any given company in Ukraine has with a public sector. And yes, with a bit of a likelihood of errors and some double checking and everything, but like the initial list of all contracts the company has with a government took less than 5 minutes to actually filter out and see, right? And of course, it takes a bit of human work to check, to verify and everything, but it shows you the difference in capacity of actually seeing the procurement in HD kind of resolution, as opposed to having this scattered, fragmented, blurry picture on procurement where you have to sort of break your neck just to find out simple information. So, and that shows you the power of data. If you have the data, you have it. If you don't, you don't. But I also want to double echo what Adriana says. Even when she's asked about the data, she starts with political will. And I want to also emphasize that. I think that when Ukraine happened back in 2016, open contracting partnership was like, whoa, we have the model. Now we'll scale all over the world. It's going to be nice and easy. We all celebrated it, global summits and everything. It was beautiful, balloons and fireworks and everything. And then you see 1 year, there's no other example, 2 years, 3 years, there's no other example. And, 5 years down the road, we're still speaking about Ukraine, and it's a magical formula that happened there post-revolution. There was a lot of dynamics in the markets, a lot of good people joined the government, basically with almost, like free of charge work and everything. So it takes a bit of analysis to understand why it happened in Ukraine. It didn't happen in other countries. But I want to emphasize that open data and open contracting data standards is such an easy technical solution once you actually want to publish data.
Exactly.
If you cross that bridge, then you do it, and that's where the real struggle is. It's not a technical struggle we are talking about. It's the will struggle.
When I was analyzing Polish websites of municipalities with regard to public procurement, I could immediately see which governor was open-minded and which one was not so keen to show the data. So we have to remember that there is nothing like 100% perfect legislation or an act. There is always a group of people or a person behind it who can do something very good with such an act, or just use it in a minimum way, and still not be transparent and not be accountable. So promoting those good examples, I think this is one of the options that we as the civil society have right now, because what are other chances for us to change this way of thinking? Because this attitude is like the other part of the success of being transparent and accountable. So on one side, we have this legislation and we're hoping for the best legislation ever. But as I said, there is nothing like 100% perfect act. So what can we do to actually try to change this attitude of our governors so that they can join a very small group of mayors, presidents, and other governors who are staying open-minded, and they really care about including the citizens into the process of creating a democratic country. Do you have any ideas, or maybe you have heard about some ideas in that regard?
I do think that especially in public procurement, the biggest problem is that public procurement is complicated. Like it has multiple phases. It has on every level of region, national, it has different rules. There are very specific features to public tenders data sets, like let's say the quality best price ratio. It's a very technical thing, and there are some simple red flags, like only one company who applied for a tender that you can apply all over the place, but people don't know because they're just like, well, this is just too complicated. And what I find that the here is also where journalists should get more educated on, I find, because it's our job to get educated on this and tell the stories to people. However, I was born in Slovakia and I lived there for 20 years. Now I live in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, in Slovakia, there's a law that makes it mandatory for every contract to be public, otherwise it's not valid. And I came to the Netherlands, and in Netherlands transparency is pretty sad. And even my colleague journalist when asked me, so you think if we got this public spending data, there are stories there? And I'm like,
it blew your
so
mind.
they don't even know. Yeah, they don't even know. People don't even know that there is this super interesting data out there that nobody's sharing, and it's not even the public, because the public, let's be fair, they have their own problems often. I'm not saying the public is stupid, not at all, but it's our job to inform them and to give them information, to be able to understand what's happening. But if we are not doing that, then they're not going to do that themselves. Most of them they won't. So I see it also as a failure in journalism, actually.
Right. Also, one real life stories from my work. I started my tour over the municipalities in Poland with the presentation of our tool Tenders Guru, where we present the data from 4 and now 5 countries, European countries, with red flags, with publications, etc. It's a very, very useful tool. So I started my tour from municipality to municipality to show how this tool can be useful to their municipality and to raising the transparency in their office. And each time, with one small exception, every time I entered the office, I had an appointment with the mayor, let's say, or the president of the city. Every time I entered the office, the whole office freezed, as if and immediately they changed or they absorbed the attitude of being very defensive. Although I did not want any documents, I didn't want to ask any tough questions, but I felt that they were very suspicious. They thought that I would come with tons of accusations, etc. Whereas I just wanted to present the tool that could be very, very useful. And each conversation would take like for an hour. And in the middle of the conversation, they only realized that, okay, we're safe. So we can actually smile and we can actually learn something from this tool. So maybe you can show us more and more. So this was very interesting to see. So this is what I wanted to ask you. What are your experiences with cooperation with municipalities, with public institutions, etc.? I'm very, very interested what Veronica has to say in that regard. Do you have any experience like that?
Yeah, we are working very closely with regulatory bodies, which is, for example, the Ministry of Economy, with the Department on Regulation on Public Procurement, with the Ministry of Finance, and with Accounting Chamber, in terms of analytics. So what we do is that we basically go to them, we teach them how to use our analytical tools, because as I previously mentioned, we have public BI module and we have professional BI modules. In public BI module, we have like indicators that allow you to analyze public procurement. In professional BI module, like we have, it is possible to create like own dashboards and charts. And so the user of the professional BI module can create the analytics they want, like for their needs. And this is what we are teaching these institutions, like the ministries, to use this professional BI module so they can extract data on public procurement that they need. Just like to give you a couple of examples. Recently, there was like in 2020, there was a law on the new version of the law on public procurement adopted, and there was like a new public procurement procedure implemented. It is called catalogs or Prozoro market. It is basically a marketplace, like a eBay for procurers. When procurer can just see the list of different options, like proposals, and can just add the item that they want to the basket, and then basically that's how it works. This procurement procedure is it is used for the pre-threshold procurement and also for procurement up to 200,000 hryvnias, something like that. And the thing is that we have teach the central procurement bodies and the state-owned enterprise Prozoro, like which is working with the whole this data on Prozoro. We have teach them how to use our analytical tools so they can analyze whether this innovation, so where are the mistakes, where are the violations, and what needs to be improved. improved. And what the analytics can do is that it can check whether like an implemented solution was good, and where are the violation and what needs to be improved. And this is basically how we work with regulatory bodies. And for example, the Anti-Monopoly Committee and the Ministry of Economy, they are also using our tools basically to track if their decisions are being implemented and how efficient they are implemented. Also, we work very closely with, like we call these governing bodies. These are like city councils or big customers or ministries. So this is like institutions that have subordinated procurement entities. So basically, like city council, it has to manage public procurement of 500 different municipal enterprises. And sometimes it's very difficult. And what analytics can do is that it allows to identify what problems are there. For example, why the procurements are terminated, why there are, for example, no bidders, or I don't know, why the bidders were disqualified. Is this a problem of a particular procurement entity, or it is like a problem for all like procurement entities? And so the local council can make decisions well, in order to improve the efficiency of public monitoring. Like
but was it difficult to start this cooperation with, or were you welcomed with open arms?
It depends. Well, as we said in the beginning, it depends on the political will and also of the mayor. Okay. We have like city councils that are working very closely with us. For example, we started working like years ago with the Lviv City Council. This is like a city in the western part of Ukraine. And the story was it was like making reports on public procurement, and it took them like 2 weeks to prepare a report. But then we teach them how to use analytics, and they were able to prepare this report like in half a day. And since they were like cooperating more with our team.
Willingly, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's one more example, the Kyiv City State Administration. They have analytical department, and they are conducting audit. And each year they're creating a list of risky customers. And based on this list, they conduct like audit of these risky customers for the next year. And also analytical tools allow them like to create this list of risky risky customers. So this is basically just a few examples of what analytics can do, and that it can basically improve the efficiency of the efficiency of conducting public procurement, and also for city councils. But yeah, it depends on the political will, of course. Yeah. Whether the city council is willing to participate, to cooperate with us, like or not.
Right, thank you. Karolis, I know you as an organization and you as you cooperate not only with civil society and with other NGOs, but also with public institutions. What are your experiences with this? Is it different, for example, depending on the country, or it doesn't matter what country it is, it's just a matter of the office and the person?
It's very different, from place to place. But I also remember I even, read this book about the culture map. By the way, a good recommendation is called Culture Map, about working on cross sort of cultural environments. And it shows how, some people in the West perceive emails or argumentation as opposed to some people in the East and stuff. So Culture Map, a beautiful book if you're interested in that. But speaking about people, it's really we are talking about the relationship here, right? So you're having a relationship with everybody that you kind of interact. And if you feel that somebody is afraid of you, that also talks to the quality of that relationship, right? So some assumptions or presumptions that people have, but I also have to admit that I understand that sometimes, imagine yourselves sitting in a small city council somewhere, you know, somewhere remote from the capital, where the real problem is, for example, in many cases, is not corruption. They are not bad people that we want to catch. You know, it's really a lack of capacity and inefficiency of processes. They have been filling out their journals with their hands, you know, for years, you know, and years, and that's the way they have been doing procurement. And all of a sudden, you have bright young individuals stepping into your office and saying, let's take your data and let's see how you did, you know, the last 20 years. We'll look at your efficiency, effectiveness, value for money, anti-corruption, market trends and everything. And you go, whoa, you know, that's going to show a lot about the quality of my work. So it's really important to frame it in a way that, like Veronica says very rightly, I think, like what kind of added value you bring with this type of data, right? Because essentially what we are doing is we bring in intelligence and insight into the government work. And we at OCP, we are strong believers of collaborations with governments. So I personally, when I work with governments, I try to honestly and genuinely exercise deep listening when you understand what are the motivations of this specific decision maker, you know, and if it makes sense, if you can align on these motivations with government officials, that might be a win-win situation. So just to give you an example, for example, I worked in Nepal, in a very small municipality next to India, you know, where a mayor basically had a huge problem with overseeing the city infrastructure procurements. Basically, he didn't know what was going on under his watch, you know, which gave a lot of, which was a control issue. So we said, well, how can we create a data process that would give you a real-time picture on a daily basis on the progress of your infrastructure projects? You know, as soon as he realized that each and every day I can see how each and every project is doing in terms of physical progress, financial progress, any problems, any feedback from citizens, he realized that's, well, that gives me power and that gives me control, and I can actually deliver better infrastructure projects, right? So I'm not saying anything new. We all you know, kind of probably heard about the idea to make it useful for government. But what I'm saying is that that is not an easy thing to do. And it takes a bit of an effort to really understand and frame the approach to governments in a way that kind of ticks their boxes, but also tick your boxes, so that you don't become this pocket or you know, organization that sort of serves government's needs. You still want to promote transparency and accountability and all that. But yeah, my experience varies from country to country. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is that we are all people and we want to do a good job, you know, and if we as activists can help government do a good job and also score on our own agenda, that is a win-win as far as I'm concerned. So that's what we are trying to do in most cases.
Yeah, nice. I wanted to refer to just a little bit to conducting the journalistic investigations across the countries, because I'm thinking about the next steps. So step number one is access to information. Step number two is technology allows us to reuse the data and publish them in a number of ways that enable civil society or journalists or just citizens to kind of monitor through the red flags, for example. And then what? Is this the final step, that we expose the data and that's it? Is it enough for transparency? Is it possible that this exposure actually has a chance to defeat the system, let's say the system, or are there any other steps that we or the journalists like Adriana can take to help you know, improving the situation of the transparency of public procurement? Adriana, do you have any thoughts? Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually heard there's an interesting use case from Slovakia where opening public spending data has actually fueled neo-Nazi support, where the neo-Nazi party was, using this data to kind of show, hey, look at these crooks, what they're doing, and we're gonna do better. And the person who was at the time, it was a big thing in Slovakia, I think in about 2013, 2014, to open up this data and to do analysis with it, and they were doing a magnificent job, I find. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is that we don't really have control of what happens to this data when we open it, but I think it should be open. And there will be always people who will find it, and who, well, not always, there will be people, there often are people who find it and do something with it. And I think, again, if you as a journalist know how to navigate this data, you can, do really, really great things. I know a couple of journalists who are really on top of this data, and who have knowledge and who are doing really great stories with this data. One of them is in Spain, CVO, who I know, the director of CVO. I met her a couple of years ago at a conference, and we were like nerding together on
Eva.
public spending. Eva, yes. And she was like, "Oh my God, every morning I'm reading all these tenders," and I'm like, "Oh my God, that's so great." And I think there should be more. I mean, I think if somehow, we try to multiply this, then the data that will be used in also good way, not only to give arguments to neo-Nazis.
Actually, I remember Eva mentioning to us a matter of something that you, Adriana, mentioned in the beginning of our meeting, is that the journalists need some training and basic information when it comes to public procurement. And she said it in the context of COVID-19, because some of the journalists published a series of articles about some corruption over COVID-19 procurements in Spain. And in fact, the public bodies that were responsible for this were in line with the law. But the journalists did not have proper education in that regard, and they just misinterpreted the whole public procurement. And so the whole series of the articles were just, you can imagine what it can do to a newspaper or to a specific journalist. So education in that regard to people who are exposing and who are going public is also crucial, so that it's not for loss. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of a thick skin. You have to it doesn't sound well. Every system needs parasites to develop good defense systems. Sorry about the analogy, but I think that the data should be out there so that the agencies should be scrutinized and questioned to be able to actually develop muscles and procedures to be better. So you cannot say, oh, we won't be publishing data because there might be some irregularities. Then we want to keep it safe, right? What's safe actually is publishing data and then defending your procedures, defending your mechanisms from all the questioning stakeholders that come to you, right? So it's also about constructing that conversation, saying that we know we might not be perfect. We're publishing this data. Please help us with your feedback. So this is a bit about the mindset. But your question, Monica, was also, I don't know if that was the intention, but it was also a bit of a philosophical, like where does this end? So we need some transparency and we need some red flagging, let's say, and some tools around data. Is that it? And I don't think that's it. I think that transparency and publication of data should be an absolute minimum, a must, a default that we have. But sure, I remember this report 10 years ago that said by 2020 in the European Union, we'll have 2% of extra GDP because of open data. And by 2020, I did not see that stock taking exercise, and probably because we don't have that 2% of additional GDP, and it's not happening. But the bottom line is what I'm trying to say is that we have to improve our public procurement using data. You need more competition, more supplier diversity, more cross-border procurement, more equity and inclusion. How do you know that gender-driven businesses participate in procurement? Without data, you can't. How do you know that you're transitioning to green economy, to more sustainable economy, to socially responsible economy? You need data for these things, and to be able to actually tell these things, you need good data. So that is the end point where I see that you integrate the data and stakeholder engagement into a better decisions by governments mostly, but also other stakeholders like businesses making better decisions and all that. So I think that is the end point: better decisions and more knowledge in the economy. But having said that, if we don't see a lot of impact in the last 10 years, I think that in no way that should discourage us, because as a default, we need more and better data out there. That should be an ABC of any democracy globally. And that is, I think that's something that we all agree on.
So I guess this is a bit of our upcoming future. I would say that my dream is to have a synergy of two registries. One registry is the business registry, and the second registry is the register of public procurement, and having very detailed profiles of both receivers and spenders would make my life very bright and easier. And this is my dream. Hopefully we can go into this direction. So I was thinking maybe you can say your one top priority dream for the next 5 or 10 years.
More public spending data and analysis. I mean, I'm repeating myself.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's good. That's a priority. Veronica?
Yeah, I actually agree, because we have a lot of data in Ukraine, but there is still a place where we could go and what we can develop. Because we, for example, have still a lot of data in machine readable format. We have tender documentation, agreements, amendment agreements. They are all in PDF documents, and it would be great to have them in machine readable format, so we have even more data that we could analyze. This is actually what we hope that will be implemented in the coming years. And also contract. So for example, the business can sign, I don't know, the contract in the Prozoro system, in the public procurement system. It would be great. It is also planned for the next year. But also a big problem in Ukraine that we have all this data and we are monitoring procurement. We are filing appeals to controlling bodies, law enforcement bodies, to procuring entities. But there is a huge problem with fixing this violation, because even if I know the state audit service of Ukraine, which is a controlling body, identifies violation in procurement, there is only in 61% of all cases this violation are fixed. So we have to work also with the controlling bodies, so these violations that we identify, well, they are fixed and they are eliminated. So yeah, that I think would be my dream, that we would develop a solution of how to change that.
I see that. Karolis, what's your big dream?
I don't know. I'm not saying that Ukraine is perfect. There's a lot of forgive me, Veronica, for saying this, but there's a lot of corruption and a lot of interests from neighboring countries, and the embedded system is so difficult to kind of fight, and you have to make that side note. But we have a good example of Ukraine. And my dream is to have more Ukraines. I thought we should have had that already, you know, but if in the next 5 years we have at least, I don't know, 5 more Ukraines, that would already be absolutely amazing. You know, 3 more Ukraines, I'm happy, you know, but that's
Nice.
the reality. We don't have many. So I need more of Ukraine, but also
Nice.
just making sure there's a reality check in Ukraine as well. But it's a very, very good example. We should follow that for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this lively discussion and for all your thoughts and examples. We actually ran out of time, and I'm passing on the microphone to Sofia.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Veronica, Carolis, Adriana, Monica, and Anna for joining this summit session. Before we leave, there are a few things I want to tell you before we sign off. First of all, is we still have 2 more days of summit, so check out the rest of the summit sessions here. I put some links in the chat where you can take a look at the webpage, and in there you can register for the sessions that are still remaining. As I mentioned, this session was broadcasted, so you'll be able to find the recording of this panel in our YouTube channel. There's also the link in the chat if you want to take a look afterwards, you're going to re-watch it again. And if you like what you saw and you're interested in joining the Code for All community, you can join our Slack space too. The link is also in the chat. And also, if you are interested in what our community and the civic tech community is doing, you can join and subscribe our bi-monthly newsletter. And in there, you're going to receive what we're working on, things that our members are doing, projects that are new in the network, and more news. And last but not least, we would like to listen to your feedback. That helps us improve the summit next year, and it's going to help us out building a more engaging and a more effective, and to build things that according to what you want and what you need. So please fill out the feedback form that I just put in the chat there. And thank you so much. I hope that you will join for the rest of the sessions. Thank you so much again, Veronica, Carolis, Adriana, Monica, Anna. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting.
Bye.
Bye-bye.